So, meine Damen und Herren, liebe Comic-Freunde, herzlich willkommen auf dem Münchner Comicfestival. Schön, dass ihr da seid. Ja, und schön, dass auch einige von euch den Weg hier in unseren Saal 1 gefunden haben, wo wir jetzt an allen 4 Tagen ein buntes Programm fahren mit abwechslungsreichen Künstlergesprächen, Vorträgen, Cosplay, Prämierungen, alles Mögliche. Guckt euch das im Programmheft an und wir hoffen, euch hier recht häufig begrüßen zu dürfen. Außerdem möchte ich auf unsere Zeichenkurse hinweisen, auf die diversen Ausstellungen hier im Haus, und ihr könnt auch draußen sehen, was für Ausstellungen wir noch in Satelliten haben, wie in dem Vereinigten Karlstadt-Museum, die Beatles im Comic und so weiter. Und ich glaube, wir bieten euch hier ein sehr, sehr buntes Programm und wie gesagt, herzlich willkommen erstmal an euch. Und ich kann mir eigentlich keinen besseren Auftakt vorstellen als einen Talk, zum einen etwa mit Paul Gravett. Da sind wir sehr, sehr froh, dass Paul uns geholfen hat bei der Organisation des Comic-Festivals. Paul ist nicht nur ein Experte für britische Comics, sondern er ist auch ein international anerkannter Comic-Experte, hat diverse Bücher geschrieben über Comics, ist auch ein sehr, sehr netter Mensch. Wir sind sehr, sehr froh, dass er uns hilft. Und ich bitte erstmal Paul auf die Bühne. Hello Paul, please enter the stage. Give him a warm hand. Yeah, and you were warned. I think we make all our talks here in English language.
See English.
And afterwards, at 3 o'clock, Paul will also tell us something about the history of the British comics in the Vienna Oktoberfest Museum. It's also a very nice location. Paul, what will you tell the people?
Well, it'll be mostly focused around the exhibition curated last year. So it's going to be the, as you saw it, I think,
yeah, that's
tremendous
exhibition.
It's called Comics Unmasked, Art and Anarchy in the UK. So it's going to be edgy.
Yes. Okay, maybe you will also go to the Vienna Oktoberfest Museum if you like it. You can enter it with your ticket. And now I'm very happy to welcome Eddie Campbell. Hi, Eddie.
So,
water. I've heard good things about it.
Yes, what was the
water?
WC Fields, I will say WC Fields line. I don't think, isn't it? Do you know the WC Fields line about water? Fishes. Fishes was waste that doesn't drink. Fishes. Well, Eddie and I go back quite a long way, really, because we're both Essex boys. At least we were living in Essex back in the early 80s. As you might be aware, me and Peter Stanbury, who's also here, my partner Peter and business partner, we produced a magazine called Escape, which, if you're really, probably before you were born, some of you, but it was a very cool magazine in the 80s, where people like Eddie were promoted, Eddie Campbell's work was promoted, but also a lot of other new exciting British artists. It was a very exciting time when people were used to doing photocopied, handmade zines and small press stuff. And it was a real new wave that came into British comics, which had been a little bit, well, they'd been good. Of course, we had 2000 AD, but with the early 80s, there was a whole new wave of self-publishing. And you were very much part of that.
Punk,
yeah,
it
wasn't really punky, though. I don't think it was punky.
do it yourself.
DIY, definitely. But there wasn't a lot of kind of nihilism or, stuck down type way.
I've got more like that. A bit more nihilistic as I get older.
You become more punk. Yes.
Angry old men.
But in those days, that was how to meet people making comics. This is the pre-history, as in pre-internet comics. If we're going to just go back as to how we got together and how this scene was happening. Right now, for you, it couldn't be easier. In fact, it's almost too much. We've got too much information, too many choices of things to go to, comics to discover, to read online for nothing. I mean, my God, it's like unbelievable. Back then, if you wanted to read somebody, you'd have to, often just write to them, write a letter. So every day I would write probably a dozen letters to different comics creators. And one of them was you, wasn't it, to make comics with you?
Yeah. It's still hard to make money from comics.
Oh yes, that doesn't change.
But it doesn't cost today. But it doesn't cost anything to make them. You just have to draw them and scan them and
That's true.
We put them on
photocopy, haven't you? Yeah.
We used to always have to pay a printer or photocopies, 5 cents a time.
Well, sometimes people are still actually making photocopies, of course, on office or work photocopying machines.
Yeah. I got in trouble at least once.
Yes.
using a friend's office photocopier.
I remember when we were doing Fast Fiction magazine. Do you remember we were at the Art Pool offices? It was a magazine I worked on called Psst, which was a very silly name for a magazine, as in Psst. And they had all the camera stuff set up so we could do the reductions, because even reducing the artwork, your artwork down to the right size. So we snuck in on a Saturday morning when we were shut, and we were breaking the law there probably, I don't know.
Guerrilla photocopiers.
Yes. Guerrilla PMTs, photomechanical transfers. Yes. But it was a heavy time, I think.
Yeah, everything's got to be done on the run.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can photocopy some of your pages on Monday and do the rest of them somewhere else on Friday. Staple them all together with your little thing.
Yeah, the one-arm stapler was the biggest investment.
I never had a long arm. I just had a little pocket one.
Oh yes, you can do it with that. Into polystyrene, and then you bend the...
Yeah, we had ways of bending the staples.
Yes. This all sounds very old world, doesn't it? What I suspect.
They're sitting there thinking, what are they talking about?
Yes. Is my English good enough for this talk?
Bending staples.
Yeah. But so who would have thought, I mean, we didn't imagine, I don't think, because we're talking about 30 plus years ago now, in the early 80s, that we would ever be... Did you ever think that you'd be published in many languages, invited here we are to Munich, and... Did you have any vision of where comics were going to go?
It was difficult to think very far ahead. We were all just trying to think, how can we get some money?
Yes. Moment day to day.
Where can we get money this week?
Yes. Quite true it was. Yeah.
I don't know.
And you're...
What were we living on? I can't even remember.
We were living at home, we were living on the dole. We had the dole, which was like an arts council grant, really, wasn't it? Really sad. Well, it enabled us to do things. I think the best, probably easier than now for young people, certainly in Britain anyway, with their student loans and everything. It's much tougher, I think, to do.
Yeah. Yeah, we had it easy.
I think we did.
We had it easy back then.
So your best known, of course, the audience here.
There was no...
The audience obviously mostly knows you from Hell, I presume.
I say we had it easy, but there was nobody... In London, there was nobody publishing comics. There was nobody...
You can't really say that, because you had 2000 AD, and you had Warrior, and you had the beginnings of Escape, and before that, obviously,
but yeah, 2000 AD.
And Viz.
That's alright if you were interested in science.
You had to fit in with what they wanted.
Science fiction or whatever, which I never was. So to do comics, just about ordinary stuff, there was no market for it. We had to create the market.
Yeah.
There is now. There's some great books out there. All the book publishers are doing great books. Back then we had to sell the whole thing from the ground up, and we had to start from nothing.
And we take it for granted now that there is that kind of the everyday slice of life stories which you helped to innovate for many ways. They're taken for granted, they're everywhere now, but they weren't forthcoming. It was unusual to have that. There was so much of the adventure genre, the fantasy, or obviously the real humour, and crude humour, that kind of thing. It was all that was comics were meant to be. I
always hoped that things hadn't turned out the way that I wanted them to. I always had this idea that comics could be a medium, an art. If we could just get the idea of it accepted. But what's happened is that every Hollywood blockbuster movie now is a comic book movie. It's like the superheroes are the thing that the whole world at large has accepted and embraced this foolish idea of the superhero, and that's not the way I wanted it to go. I'm very upset, very angry.
Right, but it's not. Yes, that's the the dominance of the comic book superhero is inescapable, I guess. But I think the big advance has been in the graphic novel, and that brings us to From Hell, which are clearly, however bad the film was, the graphic novel is unaffected. It's still there as a great work.
Yes, it's strange, this pact that we have to make with Hollywood to somehow get the world to see things. Did you see the From Hell movie? Did you like the From Hell movie? Nobody liked it? It was a terrible disappointment, but they could, if they only had the imagination, they could have had Hannibal Lecter. You know, William Gull is like a kind of Hannibal Lecter. They could have had this grandiose, frightening villain who just wears black clothes and he's a doctor at the hospital, and he's frightening, he's a maniac, he's frightening. But they could have had that if they just had the imagination, but instead they insisted on making it a whodunit. This film will only work if it's a whodunit. We don't know who. They took the book, in fact, they thought the book was marvellous. They said, we've got a better idea. We don't know who Jack the Ripper is. It'll be a mystery.
I've never heard that one before. And that was the actual opposite of what you and Alan, the whole point about From Hell is it isn't a whodunit.
Oh, we thought that was bad taste. We thought that was a horrible thing to do, to make a kind of parlour game out of something as horrible as murder.
Like a game of Cluedo or something.
Turn it into a guessing game. We didn't like that.
I mean, Alan described it more as a whodunit. I think he's used that term, or more than a kind of autopsy of Victorian morals that echo right through to the present day, of course.
Yes.
Which is the most powerful, I think almost the most powerful part of From Hell isn't really all the stuff that goes on in the period, but it's the way that Gull then is transported to our present day world. That's a particularly amazing sequence where he's in a soulless office.
He's in the soulless office. And you find yourself agreeing with it until you remind yourself that he's a psychopathic maniac.
Hopefully you remind yourself of that, yes. But that's the kind of thing which of course would have just been an amazing thing they could have done it in the movie as well. But it would have been just too, anyway, we've lost the story arc here. And you know, where's the good guys and the bad guys, and you know, this is going a bit weird. You can imagine they ignored all that stuff. Yeah.
There is talk of turning it into a 12-part television series.
It would suit that.
Now that we have those things, you know, we have 12-part like Fargo and True Detective.
Does that appeal to you as a way of redoing it and doing it better?
Yeah, it could work in theory.
We've already got Ripper Street and
communism works in theory.
In theory. But would you insist on having approval, or are you able to have approval about things now? Would you want the check?
No, they want me to go out there and do designs for it, but I don't think I could bear to live in Hollywood for longer than a weekend.
You haven't got to physically be there. You at least
they want me to go out and do it.
Yeah. Well, it would shift more copies. It would be profitable.
Yeah, life's too short. I don't know. We'll see.
Maybe would you be relaxed and say, well, just do what you want with it and not have any...
That might be easier.
It might be easier.
But that's what we did last time.
Yes.
Look how that turned out.
Have you got any is there any confidence you have in who's making it, or the director or anything? Does it seem like it wouldn't be a remake? No. The
problem is, of course, that Alan Moore is a genius, and many think he's a mad genius, and that might be true too. But once he's finished with a work, he has no more interest in it.
Yeah, he's going to move on.
I remember they were talking about plagiarism and people stealing his ideas and things, and he thought, oh well, I'll have another idea. And the thing about Alan is that he does. People have said that, and then they've disappeared and been eclipsed and ended their lives in obscurity. But Alan is somebody who does have another idea. He's the only person I've ever met who has an inexhaustible fund of new ideas.
Channel the idea sphere, the idea space, I think.
Idea space.
That's it. Yes.
Yes, he goes.
If I have any criticism of Alan, Eddie, and I do, my only criticism is I think he doesn't originate enough. That a lot of his work, and it's great, but a lot of it does mean, okay, obviously with League or many other things he's doing now, Providence he's doing. In other words, it's building on previously existing mythologies, whether it's going to be Ripper or it's going to be all that Victorian Gothic literature which is spanning right through now to the present day with League or Lovecraft.
But is there anything that doesn't? Is there anything today that...
The example that doesn't, which is one of the frustrated projects, of course, was big numbers. And the other one, of course, I thought was brilliant at Alan's was Small Killing, where Oscar Zarate literally took Alan out of his comfort zone of building on these huge ideas and coming up with brilliant original new interpretations, revitalizing.
Big numbers. I don't know if you know enough about it, but this is 25 years ago. It would have been Alan Moore's masterpiece.
Yeah, definitely.
It was going to be drawn by Bill Sienkiewicz. It was going to be 12 parts, and it was about a small neighbourhood in Northampton in England. There were no super characters. It was ordinary people. But it was all the whole concept of the book would have been based around the fractal geometry. Now that's an original idea. Well, it was at the time. See, Alan would never go back to finish this because he sees that as an idea that was valid in 1990, and the world has moved on. It was the whole fractal geometry was still something that was new in the field of mathematics at the time. It was coming to the surface where ordinary people were hearing about it.
The Mandelbrot set.
The Mandelbrot. Yeah. So the book was originally going to be called the Mandelbrot set, but the mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot heard about it, and he got Alan on the phone and he said, "I don't want you to use my name
on a comic."
He says, "I'm having a hard enough time getting this accepted in the field of science without it being the title of a comic book."
He'd feel differently now.
And Alan said, "I completely understand." And he changed the title to Big Numbers.
Yeah. But only 2 issues got drawn by Bill Sienkiewicz. And it was a very demanding project, wasn't it?
It was supposed to be 12 parts,
yeah.
But only 2 were drawn, and the artist disappeared, and they got another artist, and a third one was drawn, but he disappeared, and he destroyed all the artwork. And that's the story of it. That's the story of what would have been Alan Moore's greatest work.
But when Alan was just starting out with that, Eddie, he showed me this incredible graph of the whole thing he planned, and it had along the top, it had the 12 numbers, and then down the side were all the characters. You mentioned all very ordinary, so-called ordinary everyday people, and in each box he'd handwritten the notes of what was going to happen to them all the way through the entire project. Just a mind-blowing thing to see, and that's anyone that could plan a book like that in the first place. So that, in a way, he has finished it. You just have to read those 144 boxes and figure out how it all worked. Yeah.
Because Alan's he's obsessed with structure. So the structure of a work is the primary thing for him. With From Hell, it was the architecture of time was the structural idea behind the whole thing, and he thought this out thoroughly before he ever wrote a line of dialogue.
The structure is very important, isn't it, to almost all this work, exactly.
Or with the Watchmen, it was the idea of
the symmetry
of the clock, the 12 hours of the round of a clock.
This reminds me, because when I was working on Mr. Magazine, we approached Alan about doing something for the magazine at that time, and he was almost slightly at sea about this, because we told him you could do whatever you like, and in many ways, I think he made a reply to me about this, that actually he quite likes pushing against constraints. In other words, if you're given a structure or something that kind of contains or has to be pushed against, he feels more comfortable and just go and say, do whatever you want about anything you want. He found that actually almost more demanding, more difficult for him to come up with something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm. And when you were picked by Alan, what do you think?
Yeah, very often. I don't know if you've ever heard of his Alan Moore's magical project. He decided he was a magician.
When he was 40, I think, was it his 40th birthday?
Yeah, he thought instead of having a midlife crisis, I'll become a magician. He declared himself a magician, and he worked out all these magical theories, and he gave. His magical performance works always started with an invitation to come and give a performance, and then he would give a performance based on that location and the time. It's like you say, he needed that in order to begin. Like, where was it happening? Okay, we'll look at the history of the place. He was very into psychogeography, was a subject he was very interested in. And then he would create the work from the material that he found in the location and in the history of the location. I don't think those books are available in them. He did them as performance pieces. I adapted two of them into comics. One was called The Birth Call. The other was Snakes and Ladders. They've not appeared here, have they?
I don't think so, no. They're available as a volume, aren't they? Disease of Language, I think.
Yes, it came out as a book titled A Disease of Language.
Mm. And what was that process like? Did Alan get involved in how to transition them from performance to?
No. I took his spoken word. They were on disc. I took the spoken word and adapted them into comics.
Mm.
I kept him out of it. I didn't want him getting involved because with From Hell he would give very, very precise descriptions of the pictures. You know, for a little picture that size, he would write 1.5 pages just for one picture, and he were other comic writers. If it was rain, if the scene was required it to be raining, they would say scene exterior raining. But Alan Moore would write something like the rain beats out in Morse code the text of a dreary Russian novel. And this wasn't appearing in the work. This was just a description to help me create the picture.
Yeah.
And his scripts are full of this kind of poetic writing. But he was just throwing it away. He was giving it away. It wasn't ever going to be in print anywhere.
But it was there to incite you and to energise your drawing, wasn't it? I suppose. Yeah. And interesting, because a lot of people perhaps also don't understand how much Alan does do, as we've seen in your From Hell compendium, does do these little, he prepares the page layouts, doesn't he? He does little thumbnails. He doesn't just kind of pour out a straight in script form. He will actually, plan the pages and the panel layouts.
You can find examples of this in a book that I did called the From Hell Companion, which I don't think is available here either. But if you can read English, you can find that on Amazon or whatever. But yes, he drew these tiny little thumbnail sketches of each panel in From Hell. But he didn't show these to me. He just used those to work it out, to work out what goes where. Then he would write a long description.
Is that his system for everybody?
Yes, that's how he writes. And very often the drawing that I did looked exactly like his little. It just looked like a blown up, finished version of his little sketch. But he didn't show me the sketches. I didn't see them till 3 years ago, long after we finished From Hell.
Would you have wanted to? Would it have changed things if you'd seen his thumbnails? Or was the script quite enough?
The script was enough.
Yeah.
But it's just an example of how thorough there was nothing was accidental, nothing was ever left to chance. He had so thoroughly worked it out in advance. There was no improvisation. It was all, everything was pinned down tight.
So does Alan distrust improvisation? Whether in his own work or writing for others, I wonder. We can come back to that one.
We'll come back to that.
That's an interesting thought. Because I think there are more spontaneous artists.
Does he allow the randomness into the work? The artist is the element of randomness. He can't completely control his artist. The artist is going to do something unexpected.
And almost certainly something disappointing as well, because from your scriptures I've seen in the there are, there's too much to fit into these panels sometimes. I mean, there's actually such description and detail and things he wants to evoke, which are pretty difficult to evoke, with the best illustrator in the world on it. Do you ever find yourself faced with going, I'm not going to be able to deliver all the stuff, the elements that Alan wants me to squeeze into this tiny postage stamp? Did you ever get any feedback from Alan about that? This is not quite what I wanted, or not?
No. I didn't. I wish I brought the. Sometimes, once or twice, I just left stuff out because it was too complicated. It was too much. And if it was something he was precious about, he would try to get it in some other way later.
Oh, yes.
If it was too much to put in a picture, in the next chapter it would be in the dialogue. The thing that I refused to draw would suddenly turn up in the dialogue where I couldn't change it. I couldn't leave it out. Yeah, that happened a couple of times.
So if he wouldn't throw away a good idea, obviously if it's a good idea and you haven't used it yet, we'll find a way to incorporate it.
Yeah. I'd like to say nothing goes to waste, but many ideas have gone to waste. And Alan's, as I say, he has so many, he doesn't mind throwing a few away.
No, exactly. And your other collaborations, is there any word you can tell me about the Bump Book of Magic? Because I've been hearing that you might be involved in that.
I don't,
How do you feel about that? Can you tell us that people want to know about this new book it's a new collaborative book with maybe 4 or 5 or 6 artists. I think Kevin and Neil's involved, and Jose Villarrubia and Melinda Gabby, and maybe yourself.
I think this is a new project that Alan's working on. It's called The Book of Magic, or Alan Moore's Book of Magic.
Isn't it the Bumper Book?
The Bumper Book of Magic.
I thought it was, or the Big Book or something like that. Because it's meant to sound like a little bit like a children's annual.
Like a children.
An old-fashioned British children's Christmas book, yeah.
I know nothing about it. I'm out of the loop.
Oh, okay. I wonder if you were involved in that.
I'm drawing. They asked me if I want to draw some of the mini biographies of famous magicians, but that's only part of the book. I have no idea about what's going on.
Oh, okay. And when Alan chose you From Hell as the artist, were you the first person he came to for the book? Were you his top? Perhaps he told you that. but how did you feel when Alan offered you this mammoth project?
Sometimes I like to annoy Brian Talbot by saying that they were going to ask you first, but they talked themselves out of it. They changed their mind.
I don't think that's true, Eddie. I don't think Brian wasn't on the list before you.
Well, I like to tell them that.
Yes. To wind it up.
I like to annoy him. Because if Brian had done it, Brian would have enjoyed drawing the gas lamps and the Victoriana and the details of not really Victorian dress, but Victoriana. Hats with peacock feathers and things like that. I wanted to draw From Hell as though it was actually happening, and you didn't really notice any. You didn't really notice what people are, you know how you take for granted what people of your own time are wearing. We all wear jeans. We don't look at jeans. We don't care. Or we wear t-shirts. Unless there's something interesting on the t-shirt, we just say, oh, t-shirts, jeans. And I wanted to draw From Hell in a way that did not rivet attention on the details of Victorian clothes or streets or gas lamps. I wanted to draw gas lamps in such an abbreviated way that you would hardly notice them. In the same that we hardly notice the details of the streets that we walk around in every day. And I think that's why he asked me, because that's the way I draw. We got in trouble once because there's some sexual acts are depicted in From Hell in a very frank way, and the book had been banned. I think it was banned in South Africa, and they'd come to Alan for a comment, and he refused to give a comment. He said, "You just want me to talk." Anyway, he refused to give a comment, but later in the interview he said, they wanted me to talk about South Africa. They didn't come to me when it was banned in London, they didn't, or when it was banned in
Is it Australia?
Australia, or whatever. He said, anyway, he said, so we showed an erect penis. He said, it wasn't even a real penis, it was an Eddie Campbell penis, it was just a scribble.
Because you've all seen penises, and the thing you've all seen t-shirts and jeans and gas lamps, so you just drew an Eddie Campbell penis.
It's just a squiggle. When I called him to task about this, he said, I didn't mean your penis is just a squiggle, I meant the one you draw.
But the book is a very, very, it isn't a kind of an easy sort of Michael Caine, body stripper, whodunit, Jack the Ripper kind of story. It has got some very, very starkly deadpan reporting, almost reportage in a way of. Which I imagine, by the way, one of the things I imagine you must have looked at these incredible police gazette newspapers. You know, there were maybe anyway. There were these reports where each week there would be these fully illustrated covers of these Victorian newspapers, which gave people. That was the news you got in those days. No photographs. So then there were all these sketches of the victims.
But I was more interested in the photographs because for the quality of police photos. I mean, they're not photographs made with with lighting and
no.
Snapshot photographs made at the time. But there's never enough. When you're trying to draw from these photographs, there's never enough detail in them. You know, if it's a photo of somebody cut open, there's never enough detail to tell which entrail is which part of the body is which. And I wanted the drawings to look like that. There's just the blood is just an inky mess, and the insides from somebody's body are just an unintelligible muddle. Which, if somebody was lying open in front of me, that's what it would look like. But I don't understand which part joins onto which part. It's just a mess. It's just a muddle. And I was drawing it like that, so that there's no invitation to make a biological analysis of what's going on. That's not what was, it's not what is interesting about the situation. Somebody else, another artist may have wanted to focus on those kinds of details, but I think that's why Alan wanted me. He wanted it to be deadpan and humdrum. And, somebody walks up the street, somebody walks back down the street. Somebody
sensationalistic, is it?
Somebody cuts open Jack the Ripper cuts open a human body. Now he gets it. Now he runs away. It was just humdrum reality. It was though the crimes were on the same kind of humdrum reality as walking up the street and
which makes them
sitting at a desk.
Because they're much more chilling than if they'd been done. You can imagine they're much more splattery or showy, sort of Hollywood way, I suppose. If they'd been made much more, detailed and horrible and whatever.
So that's because I've never been interested in horror as a genre. Horror never interested me.
What about the old ECs? Do you ever like
No, I hate them. I hate them. I despise them.
Yes.
I'd rather read
Boys and ghouls.
I'd rather read romance comics because of all the old comics, they're the ones that just draw ordinary sitting rooms, ordinary bedrooms. They draw clothes that real people wear. Back in the 50s, you know, the romance genre got a bit silly, where everybody's sobbing and weeping in every picture. But right back at the beginning, there were like human interest stories.
I remember when you used to talk about Marvel comics and that you read, the pages you liked best in Spider-Man were the genre meter ones with Mary Jane and just the kind of the pauses in between the fights.
I always thought that they created a kind of reality that was interesting. Maybe it was just because it was America and everyday America was kind of different from everyday England back in the 1960s, and so just details of ordinary American life interested me. I forgot where I was going. But the American comics lost that, you know, as the decades advanced. By the 1990s, I remember picking up an issue of X-Men, and there were only two people in this comic wearing regular street clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody in this comic was a superhero, and there was only two people wearing street clothes. One was the President of the United States, and the other one was Nick Fury.
Right. And there probably were there any kind of moments where they weren't agonising about either fighting or about to fight?
Yeah,
were they doing
they
any sort of chatting or
I used to love that.
ice cream or
I used to love that. I used to look back in the old Jack Kirby the Fantastic Four. On their off time, they'd have a game. They'd have a game of baseball, and that would go on for 2 or 3 pages. Or the Thing might eat a stack of pancakes like this, and you put a fork and you eat all. But I used to find this interesting. I thought, like, do Americans really eat their pancakes in a big stack like that? I've been over there now and I see that they do. But I felt I was learning about America when I was reading these guys. So the superhero stuff interested me much less than Peter Parker going to college, or those were the parts that interested me most. And so when I came to draw comics myself, I just drew comics about ordinary, everyday life, which is interesting and, you know, infinitely interesting and captivating. There are things in life that most of us miss because we're not looking attentively enough. We're rushing to work, and so when I first met Paul, these were the kind of comics that I was doing. I was doing comics. I was doing autobiographical comics. And you were looking for different kind of things. You were looking for comics that were different.
Well, there already been the wave of autobiography coming from Harvey P. Carr, and obviously the underground up to a point. But your stuff was special because it was British for a start, and set in our local area. Yeah, and it was really
and
well.
So Paul was my first publisher.
Yeah.
35 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And because I think what you were doing was also writing really well. I mean,
you don't look like old Paul.
No, that was horrific. Also in the attic thing. But you were writing really well. I mean, I could just tell this is someone who knows how to use words. That was something that was still, not that common in comics. We're still talking about early 80s. Alan was only just about emerging at that time as an amazing writer, using words powerfully in comics. And also, of course, you use this incredible electrotone impressionism. That's not as in the art, as in instead of doing the kind of Monet, with paint, you did it with lots of bits of electrotone.
Because nowadays we can paint it and scan it.
Yeah, but back then
print
it was all hands-on, wasn't it?
Back then we had to find, ways of getting around the fact that these were just black and white drawings. So we used to have the sheets of grey with dots sticking back. You
Rub down, isn't it?
You cut them out and stick them on the picture. But I used to cut them into little tiny pieces and stick them all over it, like impressionistic brush strokes to create effects of light and shade and atmosphere. But I was just thinking now that back in fact, this is what you were talking about. Was it the English invasion, the British invasion in the 80s? I don't know what it was, but there seemed to be enough interesting people doing interesting things in comics that British comics suddenly became the place to go for America. DC Comics. We're going to England, to Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, Jamie Delano, and so on and so on.
Your old schoolmate, exactly. All being picked up.
But you're doing a talk about this later, aren't you?
But a bit, but not about that. But that invasion period, the headhunting was going on, obviously partly because a lot of these people, even yourself up to a point, had at least grown up, were raised on American comic books, but also, of course, raised on British stuff and other stuff, so they could bring something different.
But also, England was such a small place that we all drank at the same pub.
Yeah.
There used to be these comics marts, like small mini conventions every 2 months, and in London, at the Westminster Hall, and there was a pub next door where all these people would meet. So you could walk into this pub and you could have a drink with Alan Moore. Yeah.
Or young Neil Gaiman.
All these people were rubbing shoulders, and so there was an exchange of ideas about comics that was kind of exciting and created this interesting wave of very creative comics activity.
Yeah, I think there was also a real interest. Alan was reviewing the small press stuff, wasn't he, in the Marvel?
Yeah, nobody was better than anybody else.
No, exactly. There wasn't a star system or a hierarchy.
Everybody was on the same level.
Yeah, exactly. And there was lots of opportunity and openness, I think, for collaboration. Alan even wrote a comic for Myra Hancock, for her self-published comic. It's probably one of the rarest Alan Moore stories, I would think. And that was a special time. Yeah. So where are your current projects? Because I know you've got one going on about sports cartoons, which will surprise people, I think. We haven't even said the word Alec yet, I don't think we even said the word Alec. I want to just do a quick vox pop. Who of you in the audience has read some of Eddie Campbell's Alec material? You see, there are at least some. We knew that you were mostly here for From Hell. You could tell that. But Alec is, if you've read From Hell, 15 times or something, you could read Alec, which is more pages, actually, isn't it? Alec, The Years Have Pants, and it's very, very good. When you can imagine it's very good.
It's a 600-page book.
Bigger than From Hell. But no appendices. Or maybe a bit. No appendices.
But yeah.
Or other internal organs.
But that's my book of real-life comics. It's all collected in one big book called Alec, The Years Have Pants.
And is that really? Is there going to be more? Do you think, Alec? Will there be a?
Do you think? No. I'm working on a bunch of stories with my girlfriend Audrey Niffenegger.
She's your fiancée, isn't she?
My fiancée Audrey Niffenegger.
In the front. Yeah.
And
so you're collaborating not just with her writing and you drawing. It's a real double act, isn't it?
So we're pitching that as a book at the moment. We don't have a publisher yet. But,
I don't think I'm too much trouble.
But it was you that brought us. It was you that gave us that opportunity.
It seemed obvious that you should both work together.
It was the Guardian. The Guardian, the newspaper, the London newspaper, did a special on comics, and we did a 5-page colour comic for their magazine.
And although I know Audrey's here, but how did the collaboration go? And did you decide the terms of how you were working?
She wrote it, and I did it in full computer colour.
But then Audrey also did some drawing.
Audrey did. Well, she had some characters in it that were so strange. I thought they'd only make sense if she drew them herself. Because Audrey's an artist. She did a book called The Three Incestuous Sisters. Is that out here?
It is.
I think.
It's called The Three Sisters because the title was deemed too weird and
yeah,
in America.
Germany doesn't do incest.
In America, it's called The Three Incestuous Sisters, but they didn't like that title for Germany. It's just The Three Sisters. I don't know why. Incest, it doesn't. There's no incest in the book, actually. They just like that. They didn't like that title.
And are you planning to do more things together? You've done another book. Have you done a short story about Bradbury or something? Is that something?
Yes, we did one story.
Yeah.
It's in the Ray Bradbury collection there.
So you have other stories in mind?
It was a story that spun off from one of Bradbury's ideas.
Oh.
But no, so we're doing a bunch. We're doing a bunch of stories. There'll be a book.
That's fun. And what about the sports cartoon?
No,
No, it's actually boring. You're doing it.
I've done this book. It's been my labour.
It's a huge market.
My labour of love for 2 years.
There are hundreds of sporting fans.
In the knowledge that nobody will ever publish it and nobody will ever want to read it.
But I think you have to go for the sports angle. The sports angle, sure.
Right. It's a history of sports cartooning. It's like an art book with old restored images. Nobody's interested.
It hasn't got anything. It may not look at these guys so much. Let me open up the floor to some questions, because I'm sure some of you would like to ask anything here. Any questions for Mr. Campbell? Yes, thank you very much.
You said you didn't want to go too much into details, but did you have a kind of atmosphere in mind when you did it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was all about atmosphere. Right? Sometimes I was quite happy to lose details entirely in the London fog. The London fog was a very real thing there back in the in the time of the Industrial Revolution, and all the smoke from chimneys. There was real fog, but it became a cross between smog and smoke and fog. They call it smog, English smog.
Pretty deadly, I imagine, wasn't it? It was pretty.
Oh yeah, it was very, very, very unhealthy.
Yeah.
And, but in those days, in the big cities, everything was just shrouded in soot and smoke. So I imagine that the atmosphere was somehow a more real thing than details were. You know, the atmosphere of London is almost like a character in the story.
Where did you look for that atmosphere? Did you look into illustrations from the time, or paintings or something?
One thing I
didn't.
couldn't do was look in modern London.
No.
See, I drew the whole book while I was living in Australia, and I think if I'd been living in London, there'd be too much detail that would have confused my idea of. So it's my idea of Victorian London, rather than a real Victorian, rather than a real London. The real London, it doesn't look like that anymore. And if I was living in it, for instance, I imagine the Victorian London would, and I may be wrong about this, I imagine that it would be a very grey place. That there wouldn't be a lot of colour. And I'm not certain about that, but when I first went to Glasgow, you know, I grew up in the suburbs of Glasgow, and when I became old enough to go into Glasgow, in fact I went to school in the middle of Glasgow. Back then it was a very grey place. Now it's beautiful and colourful. And I thought if it was grey in the 1960s, it must have been black in Victorian times.
Yeah.
You know, it was still grey as late as the 1960s. So that was my thinking about it. You know, I gathered as many photographs and old engravings, you know, from the old London Illustrated News as I could find. I got the first 50 years of Punch magazine, and this in bound volumes, and this gave me an idea. This gave me a real. I was almost living in this imaginary Victorian London. I say imaginary because it doesn't exist now, but I had to conjure up an idea of what it would have been like. Always aware that I was never going to get it exactly right, You know, that was a hopeless task, but that by atmosphere and suggestion, I could gloss over details. So yeah, the atmosphere was probably the most important thing. That helped me gloss over the details.
You said before that Alan Moore's scripts are always very dramatic, and he goes, "Oh, the rains," you know. I don't know what your example before was, but when you say you like to make your, for example, make the dresses less, pompous.
Yeah.
What does this collide? Do you have
I think-
problems adapting his scripts?
I think there was definitely a tension between Alan's melodrama, Alan's sense of the melodramatic, and my tendency to straighten it out into something to make it a little bit more real. But when they did the movie, the women in the movie they're wearing bright green, red, and pink dresses, and this seemed to me like almost like a stage show. This is like Victorian music hall rather than what people would have been wearing in the streets. I think the clothes would have not necessarily drab. I think they might have been quite detailed in little flower patterns, but it would be grey on black and brown on black, with maybe just a touch of colour here and there. I just can't imagine anybody in their right mind wearing bright pink and green dresses when you're going to be dragging it through the shitty London streets. You know, it would be a stupid thing to do.
Well, that's one. Talking about atmosphere, that's one thing.
Yeah.
Was the amount of manure, the amount
of horse shit
on the roads.
that's on the road.
Yes, it was a
Funny thing, you know, one of the most noticeable things looking at all the old photographs was that there was never any rubbish on the streets. No, like today, there's wrappings and packets, and McDonald's wrappers or hamburger. Look, back then, the streets are clear. There's some horse shit, but they're clear of paper rubbish. The way we get everything is, it comes in a wrapper, we throw it away. There's paper rubbish everywhere. Looking at those old photos, there's no paper rubbish in the streets, and I think. In the fruit markets and vegetable markets, I think they would have dropped fruit and vegetables, but I think that would have been picked up very quickly. They used to have pigs wandering around in the street in Victorian times. Pigs would be eating things, you know.
I think we should bring that back.
A different way of, you know what I mean?
Very environmental.
The whole atmosphere was different. One of the
Those
things,
eco pigs coming through to eat up the leftovers.
one of the things Alan wanted me to draw, it was he wanted an alligator in the gutter, and I thought I just can't draw this convincingly. I'm not convinced there would be an alligator in the gutter of the street, or around the street gutter. And so I didn't draw it. But later on, he's got the detective saying, "I've seen things in this city. I've seen alligators in the gutter."
So he got it in anyway.
So he got it in anyway.
Some more questions, probably. Yes, there we go.
Don't you see an ethical problem in saying that William Gull is Jack the Ripper? Because I don't think he was actually.
Now once we got rolling, Alan and I, we didn't think he was either. We thought we were savaging the reputation of a good man. You know, I think William Gull was a very interesting, because we'd taken the theory. It was a theory that was ready-made when we found it. It was the theory of Stephen Knight. He'd written a book about the Masonic cover-up and so on. But we didn't really care whether he was or wasn't. What we were interested in was the structure of the cover-up and all the ramifications of this. So, but William Gull was an interesting man. He was the man, for instance, who gave the name to anorexia nervosa. He wrote a paper, a medical paper in the he delivered a paper at the university in the 1860s on anorexia nervosa, which is still the name that we use, you know, for the Slimmer's disease. And he did great work. I think he was an important doctor who's been largely forgotten. If he's remembered at all, he's remembered for this stupid theory that he was Jack the Ripper. And so no, I don't think it was him.
Well, would you have done something to clear his reputation in the end?
I don't know. I should burn all copies of the book. I don't know what else I can.
I'm surely Gull's descendants will be suing, won't they, for defamation or something. No,
I think we live in a world. Sadly, I don't think we care enough about our forebears to do anything about it. Or I think for them to make a fuss about it was just about attracting more attention to the stupid theory that William Gull was Jack the Ripper. So to Alan and me, William Gull is a fiction. We created a fictional villain, whom, as I said earlier, he's almost as good as I think he's better than Hannibal Lecter. And the movie, they could have had Hannibal Lecter if they just had the imagination. Because I think ours was just ahead of Hannibal Lecter, wasn't it? It was with the Hannibal Lecter movies out.
I think it was all around. There's an earlier version, wasn't there, of the story? Not the Anthony Hopkins one. There was an earlier version.
Yeah,
But you know, before.
They could have had this great, grandiose villain, filmic villain, and they missed the opportunity.
Was there ever a discussion though between you and Alan about the fact that people would think that if you're doing this great big appendices, highly documented book about, which does seem to state that Gull is the Ripper, that people would think this is your theory and that you subscribe to that?
I have been called upon in interviews to support and argue the theory that Gull was Jack the Ripper, but we don't care. And there have been subsequent books. There was a later book by Patricia Cornwell who used DNA evidence to prove that Walter Sickert was Jack the Ripper. And there's been a more recent one proving that somebody else was Jack the Ripper. And my theory is that they accidentally left the back door open at the lunatic asylum, and the guy who ran out the door just grabbed a bread knife on the way out, and that's all we're ever going to know. That's it, that's Jack the Ripper. I don't think it was somebody with a name or somebody important. I think it was just an escaped lunatic. End of story.
But it also was the beginning of the story of what we've seen, which is covered also in From Hell, of how subsequently you have the Yorkshire Ripper, you have this kind of suddenly we have the serial killer, which perhaps didn't exist before.
The idea, obviously, history has people who've committed mass murders or serial murders, but Jack the Ripper is the beginning of the idea. I think the phrase serial murderer only goes back to the 1960s. But we think of Jack the Ripper as being the beginning of the history of the serial murderer. We don't really care about he's big enough to be like the mythical beginning. He's the mythical figure at the beginning of this idea of the serial murderer. And we have so many serial murderers in fiction and television now, you start to feel that if there's that many of them around, there's got to be a couple in the room today.
Okay, which one of you is a serial killer? Come on, hands up. Yes. So last questions. I think we're on our own time now. Let's go both of you in if we can. Yeah.
How long did you work on one page of this very thick book?
From Hell. I used to do 3 or 4 pages a week. I couldn't draw that quickly now. I'm much slower now. And I think that there were sloppy mistakes which we fixed when we came to do when we gathered it together the book, we revised it and fixed a lot of details. But the history of the book is it's a strange and terrible story. you know, we lost the rights to From Hell at one point.
Oh my God.
And we lost the actual copyrights. I had to get a lawyer to get them back. And there was another time where we had nothing. Our printer went bankrupt. And we couldn't get the negatives. You know, and back then, you needed huge big negatives to print the book. Nowadays we don't do that. Nowadays it's all digital, and the digital information goes straight to the printing plate. But back then you had to transfer the pictures to the plate by using these huge photographic negatives, and the plate would be light sensitized and so on, photographically sensitized, and you flash the light through the negatives onto the printing plate. We couldn't get the negatives back to the printer. We had to. This printer already owed us $20,000, and he was going out of business. We had to pay him to get a truck and sneak into his own plant in the middle of the night to get the negatives out. We had to give him a couple of $1,000 to get to rent a truck and steal the negatives from his own printing plant. And then when we got the negatives, we had to find a digital scanning place that made these gorgeous scans from the negatives. And the new editions that are out just now, this was about 10 years ago, it was suddenly we got the best, I don't know how it happened, but we got the best possible edition. After all this muddle and confusion, we actually got a much better edition than I had before. The reason being that our printer made very good negatives, but his printing was sloppy. The books that he printed were sloppy and not very good, but the negatives were good. So when we were able to scan these negatives, get very, very sharp, high quality images, which we now use to print the books, and they're much better than the old version.
Because there's a new edition out, you're telling me, here in Germany, isn't there?
Yeah,
just
I
out.
hope he had the
If you haven't bought it, hopefully he's got the right files.
I hope he's got the right one. I haven't seen it.
We've got to wrap up. You had a question, so I want to ask you a question. We have to keep it short, though, really, now, because we're out of time.
We're at it.
What's your question?
Well, it's kind of a long thing, but it's about...
If you can.
Okay, it's about how could the artists survive into this label of freedom of speech around, especially in the matter of for comics and
as in censorship, like censorship, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So
how could the artist survive and could publish his artwork and whatever it was against the authority or the governments or the...
Okay. In theory, we have freedom of speech and the right to draw what we choose to draw. In America,
it's really penis.
The First Amendment, the right to freedom of speech and so on. But very often, what you're up against is the customs officers, civil servants in offices who control the market of stuff. And you find yourself occasionally in a fight with them, a knockdown fight to the death with the authorities. One of the most interesting 2 weeks of my life was arguing in Australia with the Office of Film and Literature Classification, who had decided that From Hell should not be allowed to be imported into Australia. And when you argue with these people, you find that, oh no, we can't stop the book from being imported. The customs asks us for advice on whether this book would be good or bad for society, and we give them advice. So And then I speak to customs and say, oh no, they tell us what to do. So you can't actually find anybody.
Who's the one that's doing
You
the
can't then
censoring?
find
Yeah.
somebody who will say, oh yes, we have censored your book. There's always some complicated language surrounding it, and you find that your book cannot be imported, but you can't find somebody to say, oh yes, it is banned. Because if it was banned, that would mean we don't have freedom of speech. And so very often you're arguing with this complicated morass of government terminology, you know? And so what looks like censorship is very often just a bureaucratic muddle. And if you sort out the muddle, they can't argue about it anymore. They just have to put their hands up and say, yeah, all right, you win.
Is that what happened in Australia?
That's what happened in Australia.
Yeah. But thanks to your arguing the case.
It felt like I wasted 2 weeks of my life, but I think I learned something about it, that you learn what to do the next time.
You can be prepared. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Eddie Campbell, for the talk and for Gravett. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm talking at 3 o'clock at the Oktoberfest Museum about British comics, including Eddie's work. And we're over time, so round of applause please for Eddie Campbell.
Thank you very much. And I think I'm signing books at 2 o'clock or half. Is it 2 o'clock? Or half 2 over there. Somewhere over there.
Come on, find you there. What's the publisher's name?
Crosscount.